Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started. I'll look into the first article. The first article says how the 9/11 wars changed the world. September 11, 2001. What happened? We had the deadliest attack in United States of America. This terrorist activity was conducted by a terrorist organization called as Al Qaeda. So what does US do? US wanted to bring an end to the terrorist activity. So this Al Qaeda as a terrorist organization was present in Afghanistan. It was also being supported indirectly by the Taliban regime. United States of America requests Taliban to surrender the Al Qaeda leaders as well as its people. But since there was a decline by Taliban, United States of America enters into Afghanistan, takes the war on terror, and ultimately wanted to dismantle the Al Qaeda and bring about a regime change in Afghanistan, replacing Taliban with the government. 20 years down the lane in 2021, Al Qaeda still continues to be present in Afghanistan and Taliban continues to rule Afghanistan. This is where the author goes on to say that the attempt of United States of America in 2001 taken forward to 2021 has failed, says the article. In fact, we also saw Islamic State bombing close by to the Kabul airport, and United States of America was not able to evacuate its own citizens in Afghanistan. This is a tragic testimony to everything that went wrong with the America's war on terror, says the author. Now the question is, will United States of America continue to bring an end to the terrorist activities in Afghanistan? Yes, says the President of United States of America. However, there are multiple challenges that United States of America may have to see in Afghanistan. What are those? One, it has lost its complete base in Afghanistan. United States of America had created lot number of assets. It had people in place, it had intelligence wing in place, it had also created assets and infrastructure to dismantle the terrorist activities in Afghanistan. But with the withdrawal of United States of America from Afghanistan, soldiers no more present, its intelligence unit not present, will they be able to do that in the near future? No. That happens to be the first challenge. Followed by this, we had Pakistan, which was supporting United States of America from the Cold War. You had Pakistan, which was supporting United States of America because it was giving a lot of funding to Pakistan. But now what is happening? The Cold War has ended and there is a tilt of Pakistan towards China as well. So the compatibility, the bonhomie that Pakistan had with United States of America may not go forward, and as a result, the second major challenge is Pakistan may not cooperate with United States of America. Third is in reference to the neighboring countries. We did speak about the CSTO, which happens to be one of the military bloc led by Russia. Russia has also warned number of Central Asian countries not to support the refugees as well. In fact, number of countries in and around are also skeptical about accepting the refugees as well. They're not even looking into accepting the words of United States of America. So the neighboring countries may not accept the dictates of United States of America is the third major challenge. Followed by this, they can only play an important card in Afghanistan by making use of their card in Gulf. How? By making use of the UAVs, by making use of the drones. But now the question is, even if they have to fly these drones from the Gulf countries to Afghanistan, since they were not able to bring an end to 20 years, how will they be able to conduct such an operation from the Gulf countries is the fourth major challenge. Yes, we have the President of United States of America who says that it will continue to wage a war on terror, it will continue unabated. But what we have is all these challenges that United States of America may face in Afghanistan. Added to this, the author also brings into context another viewpoint to this article. The author says that it is the United States of America's appeal towards regime changes in multiple countries also led to this dismissal state of affairs. Why? Let's take the example of Iraq. What happened? You had Iraq, which was assumed to have some of the weapons of mass destruction. So what does United States of America do? United States of America enters Iraq, brings about massive changes in the regime which was once held by President Saddam Hussein. So what happens? There is a country, the country is run by one of the presidents called as Saddam Hussein. Now Saddam Hussein is removed. What you have is lawlessness And whenever there is lawlessness, that is when a terrorist organization, a radical extremist organization, a fundamentalist organization will immediately grow in that particular region. So what was happening in Afghanistan was not taken seriously by United States of America in an indirect way, because it was operating in Iraq in the form of dismantling the existing structure. When the existing structure is dismantled, what we will have is a lawlessness, and it is this very lawlessness which will give rise to a terrorist organization. So during this period on war on terror in Afghanistan, United States of America was also conducting another operation in Iraq, during which Al Qaeda in Iraq, using the lawlessness, was giving impetus to itself. The author brings into light another example as well. He takes into picture Libya. What was happening in 2011? We have discussed in the past as well. There was Arab Spring that was going on in Tunisia, in Egypt, where people went against the government, people went against the monarchies, people went against the existing governments. Why? Because there was a large scale livelihood issue, there was unemployment crisis, people did not have food to eat, they did not have good economics as well. As a result, people went against their governments in Egypt as well as in Tunisia. This also spread to Libya as well. People wanted to go against the ruler back then, who happens to be Gaddafi. So Gaddafi, within 1 week of the protest, wanted to hunt down the people of all those who went against Gaddafi. Gaddafi, in fact, goes on to say, for all those who protested against the ruler, he will capture them inch by inch, room by room, home by home, alleyway by alleyway, and in fact, person by person, and will kill such people who went against the ruler. So, assuming that this could be a civilian problem in Libya, we have United States of America, which took permission from United Nations, and they wanted to bring about a change in regime in Libya. So, this was under Operation Unified Protector. So, United States of America, assuming that people in the country of Libya may face consequences because of the warning of Gaddafi, brought about a regime change in Libya as well. So what happens in Libya? Libya also enters the mode of anarchy. So on one side, United States of America is fighting a war on terrorism in Afghanistan, bringing about a regime change in Iraq. Because of the lawlessness, what we have is Al Qaeda coming up in Iraq, and when you have Libya, which is also entering into a state of anarchy, because United States of America brings about a regime change in Libya as well. Not only this, there were other issues as well. Let's take for example Syria. What happens in Syria? United States of America indirectly, not directly involved, but in an indirect way, also wanted to destabilize the system. It wanted to remove the regime of President Bashar al-Assad as well. So all this meant that whenever there is a volatility in the system, whenever there is a regime change, when the regime change does not happen on a gradual process, when there is no democracy, ultimately people in the radical forces will make use of such lawlessness and ultimately take birth in the form of terrorist organization. In fact, such lawlessness also propped up the idea of one religion versus another, one religion which is in the Western countries to another religion present in the West Asian countries. It also popped up West Asia versus the Western countries, and as a result, what United States of America wanted to end all these terrorist activities, in fact gave more rise to another terrorist activities in Western Asia, says the author. As a result of this lawlessness, as a result of this volatility, as a result of these new regime changes that were brought about by United States of America, new fundamentalist activities were initiated in West Asia. Added to this, when there is anarchy, when there is lawlessness, people are skeptical to stay in that country, which is what is happening in Afghanistan when a terrorist organization takes over. So what they would do, they will start moving from one country into another. This will obviously mean refugee crisis. So countries whose regime were dismantled, their people started moving from African countries of Libya, Egypt and multiple countries to the European power countries, and at the same time they started moving to in and around countries as well. Added to this crisis, when people started moving from the African countries to the European countries by making use of the existing boats that were present. They also lost lives as well. Such has been the pathetic state of affairs during this period. While all of this was happening in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, who was the major stakeholder? It was United States of America. Since United States of America was spending a lot of money in all these activities on the war on terror, there was a geopolitical setback to United States of America. Why? On one side, United States of America is spending money for which it is able to gain only minimal advantages, but on the other side you have China, which is also developing on the economic front as well. So during this particular period, there was a direct clash between United States of America and China on the geopolitical front. On one side, United States of America is spending a lot of money. On the other side, China is taking up geopolitical advantages. It wanted to showcase itself as the only country which can take upon United States of America, and ultimately it became a war of clashes between United States of America and China. After the Cold War era ended in 1990, the only superpower that we had was the United States of America. But after all of this, you had another power in the form of China, which was able to give a counter to United States of America. So now the question is it going to decline the power of United States of America? No, says the author. In fact, back in the 1970s and also in the 1980s, you had United States of America which was wanting to get its power in multiple countries. There was a clash of Russian communist regime and the capitalist United States of America's regime. During this particular period, it also lost war in Vietnam as well. It also lost war in number of countries as well. But over the period of time, because of the issues and mistakes made by Russia, Soviet Union back then, they were able to come back on the international forum. So mistakes made by other powers is what United States of America will have to wait and watch. So now in the present situation, you will have China which might make blunders like the Soviet Union, and as a result United States of America is here to stay. So Afghanistan is not the end of the American power, but it's the beginning of United States of America's and China's clash. We have seen it in the past as well. The samples have been seen as well. One is in the form of trade war, second is in the form of South China Sea issue, third is in the Indo-Pacific region, and we recently have United States of America also enter into security alliance with United Kingdom and Australia as well. So what we will wait and watch is a new picture of fight between United States of America and China for the dominance in the global affairs. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says holding TNCs accountable. What does TNC stand for? It stands for transnational corporations. What are these transnational corporations? You can also call them as multinational enterprises. You can also call them as multinational corporations as well. When you consider these MNCs or the multinational corporations, they operate in multiple sectors. Let's say for example, extraction industries, telecommunications, information technology, electronic consumer goods, footwear and apparel, transport, banking and finance, so on and so forth. So as and when we speak about these multinational companies, they operate on different types of sectors. As part of assignment, you have to put on the comment section which are some of the world-class multinational companies that you feel can influence the outcome of a country. Please put it on the comment section. Now, what does this article speak about? This article currently goes on to say that there are multinational companies. These multinational companies may violate the human rights in a particular country. So this article says how we can ensure that MNCs respect the human rights of a particular country. There are some international obligations that it has to meet, and what is that it has to comply with. First up, there are two viewpoints to the international relations human rights. One is what is called as the traditional viewpoint to the human rights. Next, what we have is the modern viewpoint. What is this traditional viewpoint to the human rights? According to the traditional viewpoints, what we have is the state as well as the human rights. These are the rights which are given to the people. So it is only the state, that is the country, which should be able to define what these human rights are. It is not the international rules and regulations or any commitments, but it is only that state, that country, that particular government which would be able to define what these human rights are. So when you consider the traditional viewpoint, it is only the state, which means only the country, which would be defined what is the human rights, what are these laws, what are these rules, what are these regulations. So there is no acceptance of international treaty whatsoever. But when you consider the modern view, what we live is in a globalized world. What does this globalized world mean? That a country will have its own set of rules and regulations. Yes, India will have its own set of rules and regulations, but India will also have to comply by the international rules and settlements. That is what is called as modern view. So a modern viewpoint of human rights says that India will have rights, every country will have its rights, but added to this, in supplementary to this, what India has to comply by is to the international human rights. That is what is called as the modern view. So according to the modern view, if you consider MNCs, MNCs should not only comply by the rules of that particular country, they should listen and follow to the international commitments, international human rights, says the modern viewpoint. But what are the concerns when it comes to the MNCs? MNCs usually believe that they can actually make and bring changes in the local laws. When you have a weaker country, this weaker country does not have much of rules and regulations. All that it wants is good economics in this particular country. All that it wants is investments in this country. So because the MNCs are able to pump in huge amount of money, what do these MNCs do? The MNCs bring changes of laws at the local level. So what is happening here? These MNCs have huge money in their kitty. They go to a weaker country, they go to a less developed country, they go to a country where democracy may not be present in this particular country. They bring about changes in law such that human rights may not be entertained at all. Let's say for example, there are some minimum international laws, but these minimum international laws will not find a place in the local laws in that particular country. So what do? They abuse the employees. They also employ the child laborers, discriminate certain employees. They bring about massive changes in the working conditions. Safe and healthy working conditions may not be present in that region. And we also have trade unions which are present in a particular country, but this trade union's bargaining power is not respected by that particular country. Added to this, there has to be transfer of appropriate technology and intellectual property. They should also not dump the toxic waste in that particular country, but because the MNCs have huge amount of money, they bring changes in these local laws, ultimately violating the international human rights. If we have to take the examples, we can take the corruption scandal involving Siemens in Germany, which was one of the MNC scandal where they were able to bring massive changes in Germany as well. So what are we speaking about? We are speaking about MNCs. MNCs not respecting international human rights, and as a result, they wield enormous amount of power, and ultimately they are not accountable to the governments in that particular country. On one side, we have the international human rights, international human values, international human rights which have to be respected, but because they have huge money in their kitty, they are able to bring massive changes in a country, and these laws are not subjecting them to the rights which have to be respected. So what is the suggestion that we can take? One of the suggestions that we can take is that these MNCs, the TNCs, will have to protect the internationally proclaimed human rights. As a result, we have the United Nations Working Group on Human Rights, transnational corporations and other businesses, which has now published a new report which goes on to point out about human rights compatible international investment agreements. So if there are these MNCs operating in another country, these laws will have to be such that they are compatible with the human rights of that particular country as well as with the international obligations. In the past, we have former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who said in 1975 in the United Nations General Assembly that the international community should articulate standards of conduct for the TNCs. But this did not come into picture. Why? That is because you had the clash between the developed and the developing countries. Since there was friction, they were not able to build on a consensus. Ultimately, this did not come into implementation. But it is now the right time to understand the issues with the countries. We have another important mode of economics. What is it? It is called as the bilateral investment treaty. What happens? You would have one country, let's say for example India. Let's take any other country, let's say United States of America or United Kingdom or France. If there are companies whose headquarters is based in United States of America or in UK or in France, India will give a promise to that particular company that you invest in India and all your rights will be adjusted, all your rights will be respected, and India will stand by the contract value system. So what is this bilateral investment treaty? It is an agreement between two countries where one country's company will make an investment in another company, and that country where the investment is made will ensure that all the rights of the company is protected over a period of time. In case it is violated, there will be contract rules and regulations and the company would be able to sue a particular country. But whenever we have a bilateral investment treaty that has come into picture, it is mostly in the form of protecting the foreign investor, but it is not following some of the obligations that these companies will also have to follow. Anything for that matter will have rights and they will also have obligations or the duties as well. On one side, these bilateral investment treaties are catering to the rights of the companies, but these companies are not following and respecting the duties that they have to follow in that particular country. So what should happen? This is where we have to look into one of the landmark judgments given in one of the international tribunal with respect to one of the cases called as Urbaser versus Argentina. There are three parties in this particular case. One happens to be a concessionaire, which is a local company, or you can call it as a local organization in Argentina. Then you have Urbesa, which happens to be a Spanish environmental managed company, and third you have is the Argentinian government. So what exactly happens? During the 1990s, you had Argentinian government which had privatized the water and the sanitation services. During this period, you had the local companies which had the major stakeholder option, and you also had foreign companies which used to make investment in the water and the sanitation services. But back in the year 2001, what we witnessed is financial crisis in 2001, and as a result, Argentina had to bring massive changes in its economic policies. So in 1990, it had given permission to some of the companies which are based from Spain to engage and actively invest in Argentinian companies. But then, because of the financial crisis, this old structure was dismantled, and as a result, what you saw was this local company went into a loss because of the new economic policy introduced by Argentina, and this Urbesar, which had also been a minor stakeholder, also went for a loss. Why? Because the Argentinian government also took over the activities of water as well as sanitation. So who was facing the losses? It is the Urbesar. So Urbesar files a case in the international tribunal. It says that this particular country of Argentina did not respect the bilateral investment treaty between Spain as well as Argentina, which is why we have suffered the losses, says this particular company. But Argentina says that we have to respect the human rights. We have to comply by some of the important ideas of giving water to the people. So what does the international tribunal say? That whenever there is a question of human rights where water has to be supplied to the people, in such a case the judgment goes in favor of the Argentinian government. So if it is a clash of human rights and a company, what is given precedent in this particular case happens to be the human rights. So the bilateral investment treaty, if it is being signed in the near future, it is not only about protecting the rights of that particular company which is investing in the native country, but it is also about meeting the obligations. It is also about human rights. It is about respecting the duties of this particular company in reference to that particular country. So the author in this particular case goes on to say that India has come up with model BIT of 2016, which contains provision of investor obligations. What are these obligations? It is not only that India will be respecting and giving the rights to these companies, but these companies also owe some responsibility to the citizens of India. So what should the government do? You should not just put it on the paper, but in fact, when the bilateral investment treaty is being executed in such a case, they also owe a responsibility to the people of the country, says the author. This is where he takes the example of the Nigeria Morocco BIT. According to this bilateral investment treaty, it imposes binding obligations on the investors. If they are making investments in a foreign country, they have to ensure such an investment also comply by the environmental impact assessment. So what does it say? It is not only about the investment, but it is also subjecting these countries to the local laws, to the local human rights, to the international obligations, whereby not only having investments coming from these MNCs, but you're also asking them comply by the international laws in reference to the human rights. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says empathy through education. This can be very important from the educational perspective, and it can also be important from GS paper 4 ethics viewpoint. This article basically speaks about two viewpoints in ethics. We have what is called as intelligence quotient, where you give importance to the intelligence of a person. But there is also emotional quotient as well. There is emotional intelligence as well, where a person is not only respected for his intelligence, but how he is able to handle that particular situation. One such example that we can all take on a lighter note is how Dhoni is able to manage some of the temperamental situations with a calm and a composed manner. Such a thing is what is called as emotional intelligence. Such a thing is what is called as social and emotional learning with reference to the education. So this article here goes on to say that the National Education Policy of 2020 speaks about social and emotional learning. What is this social and emotional learning? As the very name denotes, it has two words. One is social, the other is emotional learning. What is this social? Basically, you should know how you are interacting in the society. You should know how to take the brick badge from the society. You should also know the emotional side of yourself. So basically, when we are speaking about social and emotional learning, it is the process of developing self-awareness, where we are aware about our emotions, social awareness, where we know what is happening in the society, and at the same time the relationship skills as well, which is the bridge between the social awareness and self awareness. So what is this self awareness? Basically, it is about understanding our own self. We should be able to keep a check on our emotions. We should have personal goals and targets, and at the same time we have to respect our own value system. So understanding ourselves is what is called as self awareness. This includes identifying our strengths and weaknesses, having a positive mindset towards the goals and achievements, and at the same time, we have to have a sense of optimism and self efficacy over a period of time. So, self awareness is all about us holding on to our emotions. Then we have something called a social awareness. What is this? This is the ability to understand the society. This is to empathize with the cost of others, feel compassion towards the society. Let me give you an example. There are three important words when it comes to ethics. One is what is called as sympathy, then what you call as empathy, and finally what you have is compassion. What is this sympathy? Let me explain this with the help of the civil services journey. Let's assume for a moment I do not know what is civil service examination all about. You come up to me, you say that you did not clear your preliminary examination, and next time you come up to me, you say that you did not clear your mains examination. Yes, I do understand that you have given your examination, but I only know that you did not clear your examination. So I'll feel bad for you, that's all, but I do not personally know what you're going through. That is what is called sympathy. So in sympathy, you understand a person's problem, but you yourself do not know what the other person feels. But now let's understand what is empathy. What is empathy? I am a person who's teaching you right now. I've given my civil service examination, I've cleared my prelims, I've cleared my mains, I've gone to the interview, but I haven't cleared in the interview. My name is not in the final list. So I have gone through this particular process and have gone through this torrid period. I understand what are the emotions that are gushing when a person is giving and taking the civil services. Now you come up to me, you say that you haven't cleared your prelims examination, you haven't cleared your mains examination, so I can empathize with you. Why? Because I have gone through it. I will understand what you're going through right now, what is your emotional level. That is empathy. So an empathy, what we have is an emotional connect where I'm able to understand what you have gone through. But when it comes to compassion, what do I do? You come up to me and you say that you haven't cleared your prelims examination, mains examination, interview whatsoever. So I immediately give you my contact number. I say you do whatever that is required to clear this examination. I will support you for this very cause. So you're not only understanding that person's problem, but you also support him during this particular journey. That is what is called as compassion. So in sympathy, you just understand that there is a person's problem, but in empathy, you're able to correlate. But in compassion, you take a next step and you also assist that particular person. This is what social awareness is. So social awareness is basically about empathy. It is about compassion. You have to feel and understand another person's feeling as well. And at the same time, if you can do something, take it in the form of compassion. So it is to understand other person's emotion. Why is this being linked to education? When it comes to education, you head to the schools. What you develop is interpersonal skills. What you develop is relationship skills. What you do is stand for each other. You're able to listen to them actively, cooperate with them, and in fact when you enter into a relationship, a bond with another individual, there will also be social pressure as well. You have to negotiate on the conflict level as well. You also seek help and you also give help as well. That is where self awareness is about understanding self, social awareness is about understanding the society, and relation skills is about bridging the differences amongst all of this. So when it comes to education, it is not only about intelligence, it is also about emotional intelligence or the emotional quotient. So this article currently goes on to say that in the national education policy, it is not only important that we give importance to the intelligence, but you should also be able to understand the emotions of the students, identify their strength and weaknesses, and also mold them in such a manner that if they see the roots of failure, they should be able to withstand it and also overcome that particular pressure. So what is that we have to do? So this article goes on to say social and emotional learning practices should be based on students' socio-economic backgrounds. What do we mean by socio-economic backgrounds? There are people from different types of backgrounds. One can be rich, the other can be from middle class, the other can be from the poor sections, or they might be from different environment or the social milieu. One might be from the minority community, one might be from the SC/ST community. Their environments are totally different. So whenever there is an education being imparted in the schools, all of this should be taken into picture. So the social, the economic backgrounds will have to be taken into picture when we are giving education. So we are empathizing with their cause and we also go one step ahead and also compassionate with their cause as well. Second, it says SEL strategies of caretakers and educators must align with one another, which means to say that they have to respect mutually. They have to respect the students will have to respect the educators, they have to understand the socio-economic backgrounds and ultimately help each other out. And finally, long-term success requires social and emotional learning to be based on scientific evidence as well. This should not be only on the basis of intelligence, but this should also require scientific evidence where data statistics is all collected, and ultimately they should be provided what is best for them to serve themselves is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says 1.2 lakh deaths in road accidents in 2020, says the NCRB. This article is important from the mains perspective, where there are some statistics given in this article. This can help as fodder when you are quoting some of the answers in the mains examination. What does it say? It says India recorded 1.2 lakh cases of deaths due to negligence relating to road accidents. It says as many as 3.92 lakh lives were lost in 3 years in deaths due to negligence related to road accidents. The country logged 1.35 lakhs cases of hit and run since 2018. The cases of causing hurt by rash or negligent driving on public way stood at 1.3 in 2020, 1.6 lakh in 2019, 1.66 lakh in 2018. Further, 52 cases of death due to negligence related to rail accidents, and during 2020, India logged 133 cases of death due to medical negligence as well. All of this can be very important when you're quoting statistics in your mains examination. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about facial recognition, the issues associated with privacy. All of this has been explained on 25th of August 2021 under the fifth topic, the National Automated Facial Recognition System in India. Kindly look into it. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Afghanistan is not the end of American power, it's the beginning of the new US-China Cold War. Analyze. Bilateral investment treaties should be made compatible with international human rights obligations. Discuss. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review. Do give positive feedback to your friends' answers. For those of you who want to upload the images, you can also visit our website. You can upload the images on the comment section on our Byju's IAS website as well. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.